fasting isn't about what you get from God. It's about you drawing near to him.
We don't fast to make ourselves more precious to God. We fast to make God more precious to us.
I was 100% convinced that God loved me and he loved people and whatever, and he died on the cross. I was 100% convinced of that. I was also like 90% convinced that he didn't like me.
But at some point, what you're doing is like, okay, I'm not going to God for me. I'm going to God for God.
Mm-hmm.
And so even at the end, it's not like, wow, what a euphoric experience. No, I still gave my offering.
If you asked me when we moved to North Carolina, like, why are you doing it? The only reason I had was because that's what God wants.
Hey, everyone. Welcome to season 7 of the podcast. We're in the conversations where we get to talk to people who are from our church who are wrestling with the practices. So season 7 is all about fasting. We're talking about the way of consecration in a world of compromise. And in February, we talked about the 4 different kind of components to fasting. And I'm so excited to have our guest on the podcast today. Everyone, say hello, silently, of course, at home to Charlie Shorma. Welcome to the pod.
Hi, how's it going?
Dude, wonderful. You are our first North Dakotan on the pod.
There aren't very many of them.
Yeah,
so
kind of hard competition. You've been to our church for over a year now.
Yep.
It was during the hospitality practice in February of last year.
Right in the middle of it.
Yes, okay. And then you since, even this morning, you were helping us set up. You're on the setup team on Saturdays, and you also lead a Together group. We were a part of a group together for a while, and then we multiplied. So welcome to the pod.
Thank you.
I would love even some more, just a little more context. Who is Charlie Shorma?
Okay. So I'm Charlie, obviously, and then my wife is Michaela, and I'm from North Dakota, and Michaela's originally from Missouri. And so to make a long story short, we met in North Dakota, lived there for 5 years, then ended up in North Carolina for 2 years, and then last year, or not last year, but 2 years ago moved to Arizona. We actually lived right in Midtown for like 9 months, and then moved out to just north of Queen Creek right at the end of January of 2024, and then we visited Passion Creek right in February, sometime in there, right in the middle of the hospitality practice, and then been going there ever since.
I don't know why I remember, but I remember the date. It was like right after Valentine's Day, whatever that was, that Sunday. You guys were there, and so you're part of our Eastmark group of people. Like, there's a lot of people who live in Eastmark who go to our church, so that's where you're at.
I think we were the first ones.
Yeah, I think you were
from that time frame.
Definitely.
And then Michaela's met some people and
thanks to Michaela. Yeah, there's more and more.
People always talk about how people like, we lived in Eastmark, or here on the east side, for 8 months, and we had a birthday party for Aspen, and everybody who came was like, how do you know this many people? And I was like, well, and especially on Michaela's side, like, she doesn't work, she's at home with the kids, and so for her to meet people like organically, we've moved across the country 3 times now. If we didn't figure out how to meet people organically, we wouldn't know anybody.
It would never happen.
Right? Because we don't know anybody from a long time ago. And so she's like always meeting people, and the girls help with that too, because they're pretty open.
Yeah. You have a great family, man. What a joy. It says a lot about you too. So let's dive into talking about fasting. Let's roll with it. So,
sure.
And I know you have a church background, so I am really interested in this. But prior to us talking about it and practicing it together this February, what was your experience with fasting beforehand?
So, my experience and my thoughts are maybe 2 sort of different things, but in general, my experience was not really much at all. It was something that was always like, it was just the last thing on a long list of like, oh, you should pray and you should witness and you should read and you should study and you should whatever, and you should fast.
Totally.
And it was always just this thing that was like, Christians should fast, but it was never really discussed in detail of how do you do it, what is it for, what are you achieving from it. in terms of everything else was, prayer, you're doing this and achieving this and gaining this or, whatever and everything else. And so it was very just sort of this in the ether concept thing that we did. And really the only 2 times that I ever was around it or a part of it was there was one time where we were challenged at the church I was at to fast like once.
Like for something?
Yeah. But it wasn't for anything like church-wide. It was just like pick something and fast, but there was no like design of how you should do it or instruction. It was just do it.
Sure.
And I don't even remember if I did it, to be honest. It was kind of just this thing, and we talked about it once, and then we never talked about it again. And then the only other experience was basically we had a church thing, and we were praying over actually buying some property.
Oh, cool.
And they did a thing where it was like you'd sign up for it. And
kind of like a 24-hour type deal, so you have to pick your slot.
You didn't even have to. It wasn't necessarily 24 hours. It was whatever you could do or whatever. If it was 1 meal or 2 meals, whatever it might be.
Gotcha.
But it was trying to have somebody fasting over, like, praying over this property over the course of, like, 3 weeks. We wanted somebody praying and fasting all the time. Mm-hmm. But it was kind of this emphasis on praying. We want somebody praying and then fasting while they're praying.
Got it.
And so it wasn't really anything I was doing for myself or for my growth or for anybody. You were just doing it as this corporate thing, and you achieved it, and okay, now it's done.
Yeah, which is cool.
Yeah, it wasn't a bad thing. It was just not really something that I was going to apply over a long term.
That was like a one and done. We did that thing.
Yeah. Yep. And I think at that church, I think they've done that a couple times since after we moved, but it just wasn't anything that was a really serious practicing thing that I was doing.
And I don't think we ever, I think I've referenced it once. I mean, February, this is so long ago on our teaching calendar, but Acts 13 is a good formula for that, of like the apostles, the disciples got together, they fasted and asking for direction. What do we do next? And then that's when they determined Paul and Barnabas would be sent out. So there's definitely biblical precedent to be like, okay, let's have a moment together corporately where we're fasting for the sake of clarity, for the sake of provision. So that's really cool.
Yeah, it was definitely a positive thing. It just wasn't a real tactile thing I was studying or learning.
Yeah.
And applying to myself. It was just this thing that we did as a group. And then in general, I mean, honestly, my biggest experience with fasting was interacting with like Muslim people. And that was where my view on it was always kind of, I don't know if jaded is the right term, but just I sort of viewed it nonchalantly because it was like, well, what I do for fasting or what I consider doing for fasting when I'm going to do it is not really on the same level of seriousness as these Muslim people I see and know and observe who fast for Ramadan, really kind of like what Lent is, right? They're doing, I think it's 40 days. Yeah. It's almost the exact same thing.
Yeah, I actually think it's why like Christians stopped doing Lent, because they're like, wait, that's kind of like Ramadan. But actually, we were first.
Yeah, well,
in the calendar of
But
things.
you see them doing it, and you're like, well, what they're doing, and you don't want to just like keep saying the word practice as a cliche, but that's what they're doing.
Yeah.
And it's something very serious, and you're just like, well, what I'm considering doing is not like that at all. And so it just kind of, I wasn't interested in it because I didn't really understand what I would do other than go to that level. I was like, that seems to be legit fasting. If I'm just skipping a meal, what does that achieve?
So I was in Southeast Asia during Ramadan one time. It's very interesting, like just how like almost the whole community just shut down, because I actually was there a few days before. So I was able to see the hustle and bustle and people doing stuff and restaurants full. And then the last half of the trip, nothing except dinner. They went crazy. Yeah. There was just like, all right, let's eat everything we can. That's such a good point. I think like out here, there's not as many. So I didn't think about that as like a good example, reference point. Okay. So that's another experience or thought.
Yeah. And I mean, and so leading up to the practice, I was just kind of like, I was excited to actually learn and study the idea just with an open mind and see where it goes.
Yeah.
Instead of, it was always before it was just, oh, well, it's not really time to learn because we're just going to do it.
Yeah.
You know, and then you just do it and then it's done. And if you got anything out of it or you didn't, that was just sort of a coincidence.
Yeah, that is something I've been thinking through. Let's say next year, there's something we all need to fast about. It's like, can we just, guys, remember, we taught about this for 4 weeks back then, or do we need to do another? Because I do think it's easy to forget that people don't know. Like even next year, even this week, someone can start coming to our church, never heard about the practice. And we're just like, yeah, we're fasting. They're like, what are we doing here? So yeah, I think it always requires teaching. Okay, so as you came into this practice then, what has your experience been? Like, what have you been trying? Just anything February on, what are some of your thoughts?
Well, excuse me. So really my only experience personally with it on any sort of consistent or regular basis was just doing it for health reasons.
Oh, right.
And so like I've done that before, but I just sort of said that doesn't really apply. That was a totally separate topic.
Including like intermittent fasting, right?
Yeah. So, and that was just sort of something I did when I was training for triathlons and stuff, and I would do that and it would help. And I saw a benefit from a physical standpoint, but nothing spiritual about it, had anything to do with it. And so I just sort of went into it with, let's just see where it goes. We'll study it over 4 weeks and it'll be what it is. And so, and it was actually, we started hosting that group that we're hosting now like 2 weeks before.
Right.
And nobody in that group had ever met each other.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like
you had
before
quite the
we
challenge.
met at our house. And so it was interesting because we were going into it, and the 2 weeks we had before then, I was like, just so you know, and also nobody else except us had done a practice before. It's like, just so you know, like this is gonna be a serious thing. We're gonna be talking about this and doing it and whatever. And so we started studying, and I think Pastor Caleb, the first week, the proposal was just fast one day. But then as like a stretch goal, he said, I'm going to be fasting 2 days. And that's sort of like the stretch goal. And so Michaela and I we just said, well, let's just try it.
Nice.
And so we did Wednesday and Friday. And we did Wednesday and Friday the whole 4 weeks.
Awesome. And so for you, would that be, you still have dinner that night? Is it a full 24 hours?
Yeah, we did eat the night before.
Yep.
And then no breakfast, no lunch until 6.
Yep. Cool.
That's what we did. Yep. And I mean, from the first day, and so we were actually doing it on the day of group because we have our group on Wednesdays.
Oh, cool.
So we did it, and then we were studying, and it was easy to kind of apply things. And it was interesting how in our group, everybody was pretty new to the practices,
sure,
to each other and everything. But throughout the study, everybody really dove into it. There was some trepidation about the concept initially, but
yeah,
everybody was pretty bought in and really leaned into the different perspectives that we took on it.
Yeah, that's really cool. I remember talking to you about that, like some of that trepidation, like, all right, let's start. And that is such an interesting practice for someone who's never done the practices. That's a pretty interesting one to jump into.
Yeah.
Like the hospitality one's like, cool, I get to hang out with people and eat, versus the fasting. That's awesome. Yeah, what, any more of your kind of, one thing I do remember, I'd love to talk about this if you want to. You were saying like, you were thinking a lot about hesed, the love of God during this fast. How did that tie together in your mind? What has God been kind of teaching you there?
Yeah, that's kind of the big application, I think, for me in the practice. It hasn't really been, and I mean, we talked about it a little bit during the practice, but even when you talk to some people who did it, they were like, oh, it just opened my eyes to this, or I got this. They saw like a tangible benefit right away for whatever reason. And from my perspective, and maybe part of it is just like I'm fasting while I'm working, and while I'm working, it's busy. My brain is looking at 10 different things at a time. I can't really, especially a lot of the time, I can't even like listen to a podcast or something while I work because I won't even hear it.
Yeah.
And so it's a hard thing to be like, well, I'm going to fast this day. I'm going to skip these 2 meals and I'm going to like meditate during that 30 minutes. Well, that's great, except I usually eat my lunch while I'm walking.
Okay.
And so you're not really like skipping the meal and taking the time. You're sort of skipping the meal and just going through the struggle. You're not really getting a whole lot of time.
You're
back.
still learning like body discipline, right? Which you had done before this practice anyways, but learning to say no to the flesh.
But for me, what I noticed and what I kind of realized pretty early on that like, okay, this is what I'm going to get out of it was the you pursuing God aspect of it. And I don't remember if it was Caleb or you that talked about it in one of the weeks, but it was kind of like fasting isn't about what you get from God. It's about you drawing near to him.
Yeah.
And
that was week 2. Yes to deeper union.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you, I think it was maybe that week you talked about the story of like you were running every morning and then you took a break and then like after a while you realized like you missed that.
Yes.
And so it kind of became this thing where I was like, well, I'm going to do it even if I'm not seeing a lot of benefit. I mean, there were a couple days I did it and I got to the end and I was like, all I'm thinking right now is that I'm hungry.
Yeah.
And I wasn't like meditating. I was literally like up in a machine getting covered in dust all day. And every time somebody came by with a snack, I was like, I want that really bad, but I'm not going to have it. And so it wasn't like this tangible thing where I was like, okay, during my 30 minutes at lunch, I'm going to meditate and pray over this thing. Like that didn't happen.
Yeah.
But over the course of time, it became easier to, like in the beginning, I think Caleb mentioned the, like just praying, okay, more than I'm hungry, I'm going to want you, God, or whatever the exact phrase was. And it was like in the beginning you could do that and it was fine. And it was sort of just this thing you did to distract yourself. But then by the end, like that was the whole point.
Yes.
Like you're just doing it. And every time you're hungry, you might be really hungry, but it was just something that you were doing. And you knew that why you were doing it was because it was for God. And so it wasn't so much a thing that you were trying to like, oh, I'm going to do this and feel better, or I'm going to do this and see, great things happen. And both of those things may happen for certain people in certain circumstances, but that's not why, at least what I've seen is that's not why I'm doing it.
Yeah.
I'm doing it for me. I'm doing it for my benefit of growing spiritually and drawing close to him. And that's where the hesed has kind of come in, because I think that there was a stretch, there's a pretty solid like 4-year stretch where I was 100% convinced that, and I still am, right? These are like theological truths, right? I was 100% convinced that God loved me and he loved people and whatever, and he died on the cross. I was 100% convinced of that. I was also like 90% convinced that he didn't like me and that he wasn't kind, and that from a biblical perspective, he wasn't required to be. And that was something that I studied and thought about and sort of convinced myself of for a long time, to the point to where I would actually say now, I don't believe biblically God is required to be by the rules of nature. Like he doesn't have to be kind, just like Buddha or Allah. Or like the deity in your religion in general is not required to be kind. The question is he? And so that was sort of the question.
In other
that
words,
I was struggling with for a long time.
It would still be righteous of him if he didn't, if he wasn't kind, because we had sinned, we have fallen short, but it's in his character, so he will love.
Yeah. It was a question of, does he need to be and is he still the God that I put my faith in if he isn't? And to your point, really I didn't know if he had to be.
Yeah.
And so over the course of, our marriage and moving and COVID and all of these different things that would happen, we had some pretty rough stretches, just like for us financially, for us with some friends that, friendships that ended, and we had all these things happening, and then we moved and like the move to North Carolina and the move to here, both of them, I was 100% convinced that they were what God wanted us to do. Mm-hmm. If you ask me when we moved to North Carolina, like, why are you doing it? The only reason I had was because that's what God wants.
Wow.
I had no other, there was no logical reason. There was no financial reason. For me personally, I didn't know anybody really there. Michaela did. And I was just like, because God wants us to. But nobody ever did, but I did with myself. If anybody had ever asked, is it a good thing? I would have said, I don't think so. But I didn't have a choice. Like, I had prayed about it.
I totally get it. Yeah.
I knew what I was supposed to do, but I expected it to be bad because I didn't think God was kind to me or was interested in being kind to me. And I didn't think that he was required to be. So I had no guarantee that it would be, even in the end, right? Like, if he wanted to screw me over, he could do that. That was fair.
Gotcha. Right.
And so when we moved there, that was sort of like the big question.
Yeah.
And it was sort of the struggle, and it was sort of the disbelief in all things that he would do. There was never oh, he's good. He's kind. Well, he's good, sure, in general, but he's not good to me, and he doesn't have to be. And so when we moved here, even, I was sort of, the last 6 months in North Carolina, my perspective on that was changing a little bit, but it hadn't necessarily changed. And then that was sort of the real turning point in that was, we've talked about before, the study we did at the church we were in Phoenix in Habakkuk.
Yeah.
And that just changed the whole perspective.
That's awesome.
On not necessarily, it didn't answer the question, is he kind? It gave me the spiritual perspective to ask.
Okay.
Through study and prayer. And so it was one of those things where I always I couldn't even confront that because it was too big of a question.
Sure.
And so that study really gave you the freedom to ask that question. And so from there, then the question of loving kindness comes up, or hesed.
Yep.
And I mean, translations render it different ways, right? The most common are steadfast love, faithful love, and then the King James a lot of times uses mercies. And those three, I think, are the most, they're the most accessible for us as modern people. Okay, mercy's kind of weird because it's kind of trying to be a really literal rendering of hesed, and then have a different definition. So that one's pretty technical. And then steadfast love and faithful love are both these pretty decent ideas.
Loyal love.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what I've been meditating on kind of before this, but really in the fasting practice. So when I've been fasting and then I go on a walk at night.
That's amazing.
After the kids go to bed, that's what I keep coming back to is, and to me, it's fasting has helped to believe that.
I love that because the pushback to fasting is the opposite, right?
And it's not oh, I fasted and now I believe it.
Yeah.
It's just, it's part of doing that. And to me, the rendering of hesed that I've come to like cherish more than anything else is loving kindness. Because
it's like loving and liking, right? Being
well,
kind to
yeah,
you,
and that's personal for me, right? Like I never
Yeah.
doubted that God loved me. I never doubted that Jesus died on the cross for me, and like I never doubted that. What I doubted was that he was happy about doing it,
Yeah.
right? And that's sort of where loving kindness is. He loves you and he's kind.
Yes.
And he's not gonna do one without the other.
Wow.
And so
Now, in our sinful flesh, we can misinterpret his kindness as something else, but with clarity, that what he's doing is so kind. at all times.
and through everything with North Carolina and moving here and leaving Fargo and ending up here, and it's like this weird circle where if you go into more detail, I work for the same guy. I report to the same person I reported to when we lived in Fargo, like
Wow.
at my job. And I work with people that I knew when I was in Fargo, but I wouldn't have been able to do the job from a technical and engineering standpoint that I do now if we had never gone to North Carolina. So there's all these different moving parts. And it's become this like personal grounding that like you can go through things and you know, if you ask Michaela, she would say I doubted a lot more than I claim to right at this moment. But it's that God does love you and he is kind. And you don't have to answer the question of does he have to be? You don't have to answer the question is he required to be by the Bible? Like by some rule or some theology in the Bible. It's not really about that. Because he doesn't have to be and he isn't required to be by the Bible. He just is. And so but to believe that is to have faith.
Right.
And so that's where in fasting, it's like, that's what I keep coming back to, is you get to the end of the day and you haven't meditated and you haven't really done this or done that. And you haven't, achieved some satellite benefit that you're pursuing or wanting to pursue. But what you have achieved is drawn closer to God and had faith that he will reward you for it in whatever way, right? You're drawing closer to him and he can give you peace, or you draw closer to him and he can give you more faith to do whatever you need to do. And it's just about being able to trust him. Because when you're so far away, I mean, he's out there, sure.
Yeah.
But I can only trust him as close as we are. And so the big benefit of fasting is that it's you drawing close to him. And then other things can come.
But the other thing that's encouraging is we only draw close to him because he first drew close to us. And so that's what's I love that idea. Like, oh, I feel drawn to him. Well, James tells me the only reason I feel drawn to him is because he's drawing unto me. But it does take that effort on your end. So that's what you're saying.
Yeah. And you're dwelling on that. Like, that's where I go on a walk and I've been fasting all day and you're like, I really wanted that or whatever. And I mean, and for Lent, like I'm fasting today until 3. And like I went to Chick-fil-A and I don't even like Chick-fil-A, but the level I wanted a spicy biscuit was pretty high. And it was just, even this morning, it was like, but I don't want that more than I want to be aware of his kindness. And that's been the benefit, is that at this point, it's kind of like you were saying when you didn't run.
Yeah.
And then you weren't running for a while. And I think you said you prayed about it not being like this thing you had to do. And then you didn't have to do it anymore. And you're like, well, now I kind of want it back.
Yeah.
And
the
it's like,
context was like, I felt like the sense of desperation. Like I just missed him. So I'd go on the run just because it just like puts everything away and I could just talk to him and be in his presence. And I was complaining though about that desperation because there is a weight, there's an agony, there's a burden. But then God was like, okay, I'll lift that burden off. So then I just stopped feeling like I needed to go for a run.
Yeah.
And the problem wasn't like, oh, I'm out of shape, I need to run again. It was like, no, the heart, like, oh, I miss being desperate. I want to go back to that because the joy I got after every time was so worth the desperation.
When it's almost like if your favorite snack is at the top of a hard climb, and the only way to get it is the top of the hard climb, and so you might dread the climb,
Yeah.
but you know what's at the top. And that's kind of like, to me, that's kind of where fasting is. It's not something I'm like, oh, yay, I don't get to have breakfast today. Or if we have donuts, I don't get to have one. Or if they bring in food for lunch, I don't get to eat it. Like, you're not excited about that. But you want to get to the top of the climb.
Yeah.
Because you know that closeness with God is waiting there. And it's like, there's different aspects of the fasting that we did study and our group really went into, especially the one at the end about like fasting for others.
Yes.
And we haven't really done it yet, partially because we had spring break and everything. But like the discussion was, and I talked to Pastor Caleb about it a little bit, was like, can we pool our money as a group from fasting? And then, like, is there anybody at church that we can, give it to or whatever?
Right.
That can disperse it.
Yeah, like a benevolent
for
type
the people
fund.
in church. And I mean, those are all things that, like, in my mind, I'm sort of working towards being able to apply those in really tangible ways. But it's like, on some level, like, that first step is kind of the beginning.
Yeah, and that's why we try to
keep doing that.
Yeah, we want to have it. I wish we're talking about what does version 2 of all this look like, because I love that we're spending at least 12 weeks talking about it, because I think a lot of the stuff you can't get like one Sunday a teaching on it. We have to really like keep focusing on it. It's what I love about Lent too. It's something on your mind because it really does take a long time, more than just to learn it, but to embody it and to experience it. One thing I think just to mention, so you've been mentioning a lot of week 2 stuff, which is amazing. One line we said was, we don't fast to make ourselves more precious to God. We fast to make God more precious to us. That's like a perfect summary of what you're experiencing.
Yeah.
That's so good.
Yeah. And it's interesting because if you'd asked, I mean, we talked about doing this like right after the 4th week. And even at that time, I was kind of like, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's a thing I'm doing and it's cool and I feel like it's a good thing, but I'm not really seeing that much benefit.
Yeah.
So I was like, I'm going to come on here and be like, okay, I did it. Woohoo, 2 times a week. Nice. But there wasn't that benefit. And it was kind of, I mean, when we started Lent, a week and a half after that?
Yep.
Or something. And we said that, or I guess I committed to fasting every day.
Awesome.
Except for Sunday. And it hasn't been perfect. I guess there was one day, like a week, I'd been fasting every day for a week, right? And then like a random Wednesday morning, I woke up and I like
kind of forgot,
got some breakfast or something. I needed gas and I grabbed something to eat. And like when I pulled into work 30 minutes later, I was like, oh wait, I wasn't supposed to eat that.
Yeah.
But I just kind of kept with it. And other than when we went out of town, it's pretty much been every day till 3. And like that's been every day except Sunday until 3. And that's kind of when it was like you were doing it that much. And it was hard to do it every day if it was as much of a slog as it was during the first 4 weeks.
Oh, right.
Like the first 4 weeks, it was like I'm doing it and I'm committed to doing it and I believe that it's a good thing, but there wasn't the desire. Like when you were saying you have a desire to do it, there wasn't a desire in the first. And it was like 2 weeks ago, it was kind of like, okay, this is what I'm getting out of it, and I understand that it's there for the taking.
Yes, I love, man, this is so much, every practice, I believe, has that pool, right? Where, like, okay, let's just take running. Let's take, I think everything's spiritual to a degree, but let's take all that out. The practice of running. When I fell in love with running like in 2017, and I ran a lot. And then it just gets so hot in the summer.
Yep.
It always happens. Or I'm like, I'm going to do something else, and then I fall out of it. 2020 hit, and I was like, I'm done with running. Like, everybody was survival mode. So I didn't start running again until about, like, I don't know, 6 or 7 months ago now. That first month was terrible. But I kept telling myself, I used to love running. I'm going to love it again. I just don't love it right now. But that's like with Bible reading, with everything. Like when you first, and I think there's sometimes where, what is it, the J curve, where like at first it's really fun. Like, oh yeah, I did it once, and fasting, like I was in the presence of God. Yeah. And then it just dips down. Like, oh, what is the point of this? But the people, if they hold on and keep pressing through, all of a sudden. But another thing I keep thinking you're talking about, and I think it speaks to where you're at in your Christian life. I think when you're, and this is fine for those who are at this stage, when you are like less mature, like what Peter and Paul would say, like, you know, on the milk instead of the meat, you do judge your practices based off of how you felt after. And that's what baby Christians do. And that's not bad. But at some point, what you're doing is like, okay, I'm not going to God for me. I'm going to God for God. And so even at the end, it's not like, wow, what a euphoric experience. No, I still gave my offering. And that's just a part of maturity, right? It's just like, yeah, this is what we do. And maybe I'll experience something wonderful, but I'm going to keep pressing through because I just want to be obedient to what he's calling me.
Yeah. And I mean, it, like when I go on walks at night.
Tell me more about that. I love that you do that.
Well, that's, I mean, honestly, that kind of just started. I mean, I was doing it some last year since we moved out to Eastmark. It's just kind of nice and
such a great
walkable
place
area.
To walk.
And it's, you know, so there, I was doing it sometimes, especially if I needed to pray or want to pray about something. But for 2025, like, you know, Michaela, she makes big commitments.
Right.
And I've never like made those level of commitments with her, but I said, I'm going to walk every day. I'm either going to,
oh, cool.
Like, I'm going to walk a mile every day just to walk.
Bare minimum.
Or if I was going all day, and I did more than like 10 or 15,000 steps, or let's say, you know, if I did something like that, okay, then that day I didn't have to walk at the end. But generally speaking, every day it's a mile before bed. And it was just sort of like a consistency thing. And it wasn't even in the beginning a spiritual thing. It wasn't intended to be a spiritual thing or a prayer thing. It was just walk. Just to do it and take some time and relax before you go to bed, you know, outside instead of just watching more TV. And in the beginning, it was just, I was just listening to music or listening to a podcast or watching a movie and, you know, whatever. And then kind of during fasting, you know, and it was before that a little bit too, but it was like I would walk out the door and put my AirPods in and start listening to something. And like a couple hundred yards from the house, I would just take them out.
Yes.
Because I was like, I'm not even listening to this. I'm just talking to God about whatever topic, you know, is there. And it became more and more so that way during fasting, because you'd fast all day and I wasn't meditating. And there were days where you'd get to the end and you'd like finally eat something and you're like, this was such a waste, because all I did was make myself grouchy and like,
and then gorge on dinner
during,
right?
Well, it wasn't even gorging on dinner. It was just, I didn't see any benefit. I was like, now I'm eating and I didn't achieve anything. But then you walk later, like 3 hours later, and you're like, oh,
it's whetting your
right
appetite
here
for the presence of God.
Yeah.
Even after eating. It's not like, that's such a good point. It's not like, no, while I'm fasting, then I want him. No, I fast. I can have dinner, and even the next morning, I just feel, because of what I did the day before, I feel this pull, this longing to be with him.
Yeah, and it felt like if you weren't fasting, then you probably could have just gone and listened to some random YouTube video about whatever sport.
Yep.
And you could have walked a mile and listened to that the whole time and not even like...
And it wouldn't even faze you that, like, oh, I should have been doing something else.
Yeah, it literally sometimes feels... I don't know if this is almost, I'm quoting Caleb now, I'm getting too spiritual, but you're like, you're going on the walk and you're listening to something and it's like, you like turn, you're like, oh, you're right there. Sorry. I was ignoring you.
Yeah.
And it's like, God's like, no, we're here, and just Like, now you're aware of it, so take advantage of it.
That's so good. Yeah, man, if we can get everybody just to take more walks, like that's we're prepping for our prayer practice.
Mm-hmm.
And, fasting and prayer, they're like cousins,
Yeah.
like you really can't do one without the other. Well, you can pray without fasting, but it's really hard to fast without praying. In my experience, but where was I going with that? Oh yeah. With our prayer practice, we're talking about one of the practices being like prayer walks, or even I call it like kinetic praying. Cause for me, like just doing something with my body, it puts my mind into a zone. And a lot of us design our homes where it's distracting. It's hard to just be still in the presence of God. But I love that. I love how God's been working on your life. I'm just so encouraged because I've been feeling those similar longings and drawings to his presence. I just love how the Lord's been using, like, just speaking the same thing to a lot of us. Okay. Man, you've answered so many of these questions. What though are some obstacles or barriers you've had to overcome in this practice?
I think, and this is probably the one that's applicable to almost everybody in metro American society, and it's just time. Like, for me, with my job in particular, it's just like skipping breakfast. Okay, you have to make a decision to leave work and not eat anything. Sure. But then, I mean, like I said, a lot of times at work, I don't stop for a lunch break. I just work. I just keep going. The people I'm working with will take a break, or will, if let's say they bring food in, well, I'll just grab some on my way from one thing to another a lot of times. And so, and if you're like running kids around or meeting with people or playing sports or whatever, you can kind of just do it and not really think about it. And that was in our group, it was really interesting how there were a couple people that when we first started talking about it in that first week, they were like, I don't know, I can maybe do one meal, like maybe breakfast, but I don't know if I can do breakfast, like lunch at all, much less breakfast and lunch.
Yeah.
Like there was some serious,
that,
like, I don't know if we can do this.
Yeah.
And like 3 weeks later, they were like, well, yeah, I did breakfast and lunch. And then, but last week I did breakfast and lunch one day, but I kind of felt like I was just distracted the whole time. So they were like, well, so in their situation, they can. And they were like, so this week I'm going to not like eat breakfast and lunch. And then I'm not going to do other stuff. I'm not going to just like fill the day with some projects or some, like I'm going to read and pray the whole day.
Wow.
And it was like, I mean, that was awesome
for what
they
them. Can do in their stage of life. And yeah.
And in my situation, it's like, well, I can't do that. And there was literally at one point, there was one day where I was like, I can't do that. So why am I doing this at all? And so it's just sort of like, it's not an excuse necessarily, but it's a distraction and a reason to not do it, because you see, well, there's this potential thing that I could be doing it.
Yeah.
And I can't really achieve that in this moment. And so I might as well do this. And then the extreme would be, well, we're just so busy, it's just not worth it. Like, so we might as well not do it. And that kind of goes back to like the Muslim thing, right? Like you're comparing to what they do and how serious they take it. And you're just like, well, I can't achieve that, so why do anything at all? But I mean, like you're saying, it's kind of, you have to just do what you can. And that's kind of where, even if it's one day a week for one meal, that will, I think you'd still see the benefit. If you did that, one day a week, one meal for a year.
Amen.
Like you don't have to do more than that.
Right.
Like would you maybe see more benefit if you did? Maybe, but God doesn't view people as a flat line. He'll go to you where you can. And so,
Amen.
Like, if that's what you can do for physical or mental or busy reasons, and you do it the way you feel like God wants you to do it, I think you could see the same benefit.
That's one thing, again, to go back to running, that's one thing I like about that community is people kind of understand, unless I don't know what the elite of the elite do.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not anywhere near them. I don't even hang out. I don't even know them. But what's cool about running is people know, oh, don't judge your time or distance based off anybody else. Like, we're just really proud of you for getting out there.
Yeah.
And so that's what's really cool. And you know, like, I think there's a version where we so personalize and individualize it that we don't see this practice as communal. I think there's a communal element to this, but there's still that really important principle. Like, just because I ran 5 miles today, I've been building up to that for a while.
Yeah.
People ran a half a mile. That's amazing for you. Don't compare it to where I'm at.
Yeah.
And God, we all have different strengths and weaknesses and backgrounds and maturity levels. And I love that you've been sensing that as well. Because I think all this, the practice-based stuff for us really falls apart if we begin to compare and begin to say, well, I'm doing 2 days a week. And if you're not, like, that is so pharisaical and so far from the plot line of why he's calling us to fast.
And I mean, I think this verse can be misapplied. I think in my life I misapplied it, like when I was a teenager. But Jesus does say, and I think he's referencing the Old Testament, but to whom much is given, much shall be required.
Yes.
And like in the story of the talents, he gives the one guy 5 and he gives the other guy 2 and he gives the one 1. He's mad at the guy who gave 1 because he literally did nothing.
Yeah.
But the one guy gave 2 and he got 2 more. He gave him the same
Well done.
reward and compliment as the guy he gave 5 to. So it's like,
That's a great point.
If you're called or told or you have peace about fasting 5 days a week and I only have peace about fasting 1 day a week, but I do it every week and you only do 3 days a week, like, I did closer to what God wanted me to than you did.
I see.
And it's the same as like when he's talking about, oh, well, the parable of, well, I went out at 8 and I got these workers. I said I'd pay them, $1, whatever. And then I went at noon. I said, I'll pay you $1. And then I got the guys like right at sunset. And, oh, work for an hour. I'll pay you $1. And then everybody's mad. It's like, well, yeah, but that's what God wanted you to do. And so if he wants you to draw close to him and he's going to draw close to you and he's asking you to do a certain thing, it's because he has that expectation.
Yeah. Like, remember as if like we were there, but in the Bible where Peter was like, how's John going to die? And Jesus is like, don't worry about John. Yeah. Let's talk about you. And by the way, you're going to get killed.
Yeah.
But what about John? Yeah, totally. We're on different paths, different callings. And at the same time, what's really cool about being a part of a local church is he often gives us the similar promptings. So everybody on the podcast so far has said essentially what our desire is for the fourth quarter, fourth soil. Like, I feel like I'm called to be more fruitful and be more focused, right? Like consecrated. I just desire his presence and to give him more of my time. That's so helpful. Is there anything else, just like in general, you've been thinking about with the practice of fasting? I feel like this podcast has been so valuable, but I really appreciate how deep of a thinker you are. And so I don't want to cut it off until...
I think the only other thing to really add is just, again, from a personal standpoint and the loving kindness aspect of it, to be totally honest, it's like, and what I would say is you don't have to get the answer. And that's kind of where the study in Habakkuk really changed the whole viewpoint on like asking God a question. It's that you just don't have to get the full answer. And so, I mean, when I look at, we've been talking about not comparing and doing what God wants. Well, I still sometimes struggle. Like, even like a week and a half ago, I was like, why did we have to move and basically liquidate everything? Specifically in the move to North Carolina, we basically sold everything we had, and that did not cover replacing everything to get to North Carolina, right? And the job I got there paid less, and like, so from a financial perspective, it was like, why did we have to do that to be doing what you wanted us to do? And it wasn't so much, why do I have to do that? It was, why don't other people?
Oh, right.
Like, why do other people get to be as close to you or be as seen as a spiritually good, as me or whatever, and they didn't have to do that, or they don't, or they get the same credit for doing this easy thing. And I'm like, I did this, and why are they getting the same credit? And it was one of those times where I think it was maybe actually the day before I texted you about hesed.
Yeah.
And it was like, I was thinking about it. And it was like, I don't think that loving kindness is a guarantee that you're going to get really good things. It kind of goes back to the prosperity gospel, right?
Sure.
It's not that God's just going to make everything magically the best for you because you trusted him or because you fasted. And that's kind of the big thing that I've been meditating on. It's not his kindness that is expressed in like physical or worldly things.
Right.
The kindness is expressed, I don't know how else to say it than on a spiritual plane.
Mm-hmm.
And it might be expressed in a physical plane
Sure.
At a time in the future. I mean, when we moved to North Carolina, I was like, I'm never going to make as much money or have a good house that works for our family and whatever. I mean, the whole time we lived there, we had one bathroom in every place we lived in. And then, when we moved here, and so there's this time where I was like, oh, well, I don't even know if it's going to get better, and I don't know if God's kind enough to make it better. And I was like, well, now there are aspects of it that are better. Not necessarily every single than theoretically it would have been if I had just done my own thing, but it's better than it was, and I can trust God. But then I was like, well, but what if this other aspect doesn't get better? What if that thing that I think was a subpar thing that God let happen doesn't become better, right? Like there's this dip. What if I only ever get back to even, or what if I don't even get back to even, or what? Like,
sure.
What if I don't see success in that thing the way I would love to see that happen? And it was like, and that was where it just, at the end of Habakkuk, he says, God, these are still the questions that I have. But if they don't, then I'm going to trust in you. And I'm going to cling in your wrath, remember mercy. And it's like, the kindness of God isn't some physical thing that you have to achieve in this world. It's part of the relationship that as you grow closer to him, he will show you. And that's sort of where I'm just trying to just meditate on that. Because it's so easy to just go back. No, it's not as good as it could have been. Like, I could have just stayed, like, realistically, there's a scenario where I could have just stayed in Fargo and not done the 2 years in North Carolina and all the hard and expensive things that was, and then come here. I could have just stayed in Fargo and then come here and been way better off financially or whatever the reason might be. But it's like, but you don't get to know the answer to that.
Right.
And you don't get to know it whether you believe God's kind or not. Like, no matter what, you're never getting that answer.
Right.
And so you just have to draw close to him and keep drawing closer and have faith that his kindness will show.
Yeah.
And so to some degree, like, the idea that God has hesed for you isn't a promise that your life is great. And that's where I feel like I'm the one who, like, I'm the less successful one, because I'm like, I needed God to give me something to really believe it. But I know people who didn't. Like, I know people who believe in God's loving kindness more than me, and they have it way worse.
Oh, right.
And so I'm like, that's where what I've been meditating on is like, well, this good thing might happen, and then I'll know he's kind, or this good thing might happen, and then I'll know he's kind. I'm like, no, that doesn't prove that he's kind anyway.
Yeah, and it's a moving
The rain
goalpost.
falls on the good and the evil.
Yep.
Something good happening to me doesn't prove he's kind. What proves he's kind is to some degree in the spiritual plane, and you have to find it out in that plane. And so, you know, the only other thing to add is just that you can't necessarily achieve whatever you feel like you're supposed to be pursuing in fasting. You can't just achieve that thing in the physical world. There's going to be a point to where it's just a spiritual growth that you have.
Yeah,
And
2 Corinthians
that's
4.
okay.
Yeah,
Like-
you're operating in the unseen realm, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, one question, because I mean, I somehow a little bit feel like our California story sometimes overlaps with some of your experiences.
Yeah.
Because it was like, God, why did you tell me to go here? And why this pain? We could have skipped
Yeah.
all of that. And even just more recently, just seeing the grace of like, oh, I kept asking, what do I get out of this? When really the better question is, who am I becoming as a result of this? And man, I am becoming, I can see the fruit of the Spirit embodied, not just in me, but in my family because of that terrible situation.
Yeah.
And I love that we're anchoring right after the fasting practice, we're talking about fruit of the Spirit, because that is so much of why he disciplines us, right? He disciplines those he loves, because there's a deeper joy when we're operating in the fruit of the Spirit.
And I mean, that's where you kind of come back to, like, for our family with the North Carolina, like, from a purely secular standpoint, it's kind of like, what was that? That was sort of just this thing and whatever. And not to draw a parallel, me being parallel to Paul's not really reasonable.
I know, exactly. But
it's like when he went to Arabia, it's like, why did he do that? What was the point of that?
Yep.
And it wasn't really about other people. It wasn't about him getting rich. It wasn't about whatever. It was just because God put him there. And when I think of like our family and who we are, and even just like moving to Arizona, like I said, Michaela makes friends like they're going out of style. That wouldn't have been the case if we'd have just moved here from Fargo.
Oh, good point. Yep.
And just the way we are as a couple wouldn't have been the same way. And the way and what we feel like God wants us to do, and where he feel like, you know, how we feel he wants us to grow, those wouldn't have been the same. And so, like, from a secular standpoint, I make this argument in my head, like, it would have just been better to just come here 2 years after living in Fargo for 2 more years, and this would have been better, and this would have been easier, and this would have been simpler. But you wouldn't. But if you would have done that, you wouldn't be who you are. You'd be this totally separate person.
Yeah.
That would have these different perspectives. And so if God led you to North Carolina, then who you are is who he wanted you to be. And you staying in Fargo wouldn't have achieved that in the same way. And so, you know, it's just a different thing.
Yeah. At the very least, you just have deeper gratitude. You know, I when you go through those setbacks, it makes you just so joyful, even for the little things. And that's another thing fasting does. I think it strips you away from needing to get one next big thing, but just savoring the moment of what is, and being grateful for that. Well, thank you, man. This was such a good podcast. I just love these conversations, and I just want to say thank you to you. You are I appreciate all of our conversations. You're very thoughtful, and I love that you're theological, and that like you really think through key core doctrines. And to me, you don't just be like, check it off a list. Okay, I have like, you know, God's hesed memorized. I know what it's called. Like, you actually meditate and like think about it. And I'm just so encouraged by that. So thank you. I'm encouraged by your faithfulness to our church. You know, Saturday setup team, that's not easy. So I appreciate that. And you guys do so much. You go above and beyond, hosting, leading, staying around 2 services to say hi to people. There's a lot of people who call our church home because of you and Michaela. So we're so much better because of you. We appreciate you a ton, man. So thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks for spending time. I know you work a lot. So shout out to you squeezing this in. But Thanks, man. And thank you guys. What should the comment of the day be? If you made it this far, comment down below. What's the phrase?
I don't know. What was later in the conversation?
Oh, yeah.
I was going to say hesed, but you brought that up pretty early.
But they wouldn't know to drop it. So let's do
That's
hesed.
true. We can do hesed.
Yeah, let's do hesed. Hesed in the comments if you made it this far. Grace and peace, guys. We'll see you on the next one.